Hello and welcome to Tech for Non-Techies, the only podcast that demystifies the fast-growing technology sector. I'm your host, Sophia Matveeva, Chicago-based MBA and tech entrepreneur. My aim here is to give you the skills, knowledge and confidence to find opportunities in the tech sector, whether that's through founding a company, getting a dream job, or bringing a fresh perspective to your work. Hello, smart people. In this episode, I do one of my favorite things, which is talking to non-technical founders about how they've built their tech-enabled businesses. And this time we've got Asaf Navot talking to us about how he built Homemade. Homemade operates in the home rental market. The company has raised $5 million to date and is currently hiring about 50 people. So things are looking up. Asaf spoke at Tech for Non-Techies, and this episode is a director's cut of what we talked about on our Tech for Non-Techies masterclass. If you want to hear the full session and watch the video, then join us as a Tech for Non-Techies member. But without further ado, here's Asaf.
I'm the founder of Homemade. We're a UK-based property tech startup that is focused on residential lettings. Right, we replace traditional letting agencies using a hybrid model, meaning that we drive the full in-person interaction, so viewings, market appraisals, tenancy progression. But at the same time, we don't have the branches and the decentralized administration and so on. In the last 3.5 years, we managed to grow to become the largest hybrid letting agency in London. We work with thousands of private landlords, but also with the largest property funds in the UK, with 5,000, 10,000 properties. And what's special about us is two things. One, we can operate profitably. So our unit economics is profitable, which is very unusual for a lettings business. And the second one is that we can provide, and we do provide, better quality of service compared to traditional agencies. So it's not something that is aspirational, we want, we believe, we think. It's something we already do and measure all the time. So having these two things in parallel is absolutely essential to our business, because if we do it at a loss, we're ending up being a charity for property funds. And at the same time, if you provide poor quality, you end up being low price, low quality. So what's special about it is the fact we can have those two things and proudly say that they coexist.
So how are you managing to do this?
So it's a mix of a few things. It's a mix of the tech-enabled solution we developed. It is a mix of having a right team on board and the right culture to enable that operating model. And it is a mix of let's call it very, resourceful or a mindset that allows to do marketing very effectively, operations very effectively, and just reimagine our operating model at every different level, right? So, and the story begins with me being, as you mentioned, being a management consultant for a few years and looking to open a startup on one side, and at the same time being a landlord and a tenant suffering or not enjoying the experience of working with traditional agencies. And that eureka moment was literally at 2 a.m. in the morning drive on the way back from the office, reading the emails from the day from the traditional letting agents and asking myself, what the hell is this? It's kind of BS, lie after lie after lie. And looking outside the window, seeing all the high street agents and asking myself, I can't believe someone's willing to pay them so much to have this prominent or expensive position on the high street. And that moment hit me that it's me paying them, despite not having stepped into a branch in my entire life. And that's when we started. We ran 9 months pilot, refining the model, making sure that it is profitable, operational, differentiated, and so on. We raised, in 2 funding rounds, we raised $5 million. Currently a team of 45 people in central London, looking to grow to about 100 people April next year. Expanding outside of London at the moment, expanding the product roadmap, and so on and so on. So that's how we got here. As you mentioned, the consultant turned entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a journey that I know a lot of my MBA classmates have wanted to take, but instead I see them still sitting in their consulting and in their banking jobs, complaining about how much they hate everything and doing nothing about it. Did you have a technical background? Did you study computer science?
No, not at all.
Okay, so what was your educational background?
So just an MBA from INSEAD. I don't have a
Just an
bachelor's
MBA
degree.
from INSEAD, just one of the top business schools in the world. Well
So
done.
my story is that I have a master's degree with no undergrad. So I spent 8 years in the army and found out towards the end of my contract that there's that top university will consider accepting you into an MBA program without an undergrad. I was one of the first ones to be accepted to LBS and Cambridge Business School without an undergrad, and end up going to INSEAD, and then moved to London 11 years ago to join basically a consulting business.
Oh, cool. Well, actually, the Tech for Non-Techies course has been taught by me at London Business School, but not yet INSEAD. So, they may be after the pandemic. Okay, so you're a non-technical founder, as we've established, and you've got this business background. So you really understand business because you've gone to one of the top business schools, and then you worked at Bain, I believe. Right. So again, a very good management consultancy. But none of those experiences are remotely tied to technology entrepreneurship. So I can completely understand how somebody like you can understand a market opportunity, but how do you actually, go from idea and PowerPoint slides, which consultants are brilliant at making? How do you go from a bunch of PowerPoint slides to a technology that actually works when you're not the person who can build it yourself? What were your first steps?
So there were a few steps in the process. The first one for me was to validate the idea, right? So I believe that you need to look at it as a founder. You have to look at the business as an investment, right? Just like an investor would look at it. An investment thesis, what are the points or what's the burden of proof? What do you need to prove to yourself in order for this to be true? And so on. And the reason is that people who create things, in many cases, end up falling in love in their own creation, right? You have your CV, you look at it so often that you think that's perfect, and then someone from the outside might spot a typo or something that's not perfectly framed. So the first thing I did was to set it up in very similar to the thing I used to do, which is an investment thesis. So what do we need to believe in for this to be a good investment? And then I went and just tried to prove or adjust the hypothesis to ensure that I have the right proposition. So very specifically, I had to prove in my model, right? I had a problem. The problem was that the traditional letting agents were very, very expensive, nearly 10% of the annual income. It was very painful to deal with them. The process was not lacking transparency. It was very outdated, very slow, poor communications, and so on. And more than anything, it was just no one was working in to help me as the customer. It was very non-customer centric.
That's true. It's a profession that is universally hated.
It's not the most liked one, but I think the realization is that it's not the people that are to blame. It's just a model that's no longer fit for purpose. It's a model that was designed for a different century. And if you had 30 years ago, if you had a better location at the high street, you would have more people walking in and you could charge higher fees. That's just not the case anymore. And there's no justification, same as the decline of retail to a certain extent, high street retail. There's no justification for the high street agencies. And a lot of them operate in an archaic setup. So for me, it was a lot around, I had this problem, and the solution might change, but you constantly focus on the problem. What is the problem that you're trying to address? And for me, it started by saying, okay, let's first prove that the market is good, that I can gain market share, and that the unit economics, both as a user on a per unit basis and as an investor, makes sense, that I don't end up again being a charity in a non-viable business. So on the market side, it was very simple to prove that it's large and fragmented and growing, and the regulations on. Still on the market, I had to prove there's a pain point, right? So we ran a survey with a large number of landlords. We collected reviews and so on. It was very simple to prove that no one would ever question whether it is a painful experience to work with traditional letting agents or if the market is big enough. It doesn't matter if it's a 4 billion or 6 billion or 2 billion, it's big enough. So I spent very little time on that one. The second point was to prove that I can gain market share.
I just wanted to kind of emphasize this point here as well, because I find that sometimes, especially business school people, end up focusing so much on market sizing that then they have no time and energy left to actually work on the execution. That I think it's really good to note that you didn't do that. That's why you actually got something off the ground, because I think there is such a danger, especially with highly educated people, to get into analysis paralysis and to just think, you just need to read one more report, just learn one more thing, and then there will be eureka.
I'll get there in a second, because the concept of good enough is very, very important, right? And what this allowed me is to allocate my resources in the right place and not end up spending a lot of time on exact the market size. Who cares? No one cares about the market size as much, because the burden of proof is actually, one, that you're different, that my proposition was differentiated. Secondly, that I can get the right team on board, whether it's product and tech or marketing and so on. And then on the unit economics, I had to prove that the model is viable, right? And also the investor economics are viable. There's a way in and there's a way out, right? If you can't sell it, then there's no way out, really. And the second point, that with this investment, I just ran and I took a long leave absence. I ran through a pilot, just literally walking the walk and running, doing viewings and developing some of the tech or some of the platform. A lot of the front end, so make sure the design is pleasant. The functionality was just done in the back by Excels and emails, but then it felt very much tech-enabled.
So could you talk us through literally some of the things that you did? Because I know that some of the people who are watching this, they've already got an idea, they're pretty clear on their idea, but they just don't know what steps to take. And so many of them, which I'm trying to tell them not to do, so many of them think, I've got an idea, the first thing I need to do is hire developers. And so when you say actually, it was done with emails and databases, I really want to know about this. This is the kind of nerdy stuff we discuss here.
That's okay. So the key question starts with, what do users really want? Do they want the service you provide or the product you provide, or do they care about the tech platform itself? In my case, it was very simple. They want to get the end outcome done, and they cared less about how it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the tech platform, to a certain extent, and allow them to justify how come we're so much cheaper, right? We cost less than a quarter, less than a fourth of the traditional letting agents' fees, and they need to justify how you can charge so little and still to provide, and yet provide good quality of service. So the tech platform was more of an excuse for them to understand how it could be done. So given that it was not essential, right, they didn't need to be able to change pricing directly, I created a front end, something that cost about £100, very, very cheap, super commoditized, very easy. With forms, it submits forms. These forms turn into requests. I would just execute the request real time, working very hard, and it felt that you pull something and something happens in return. So that was a very simple option of how you fake it till you make it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you need to make sure that you communicate in a way that maintains the trustworthiness of your platform, especially as it's part of our vision, right? You want to be the most trusted provider in the letting business, given how untrustworthy it is. So I want to make sure that I constantly communicate that it's a tech-enabled, it's a semi-automated, not fully automated, and so on. You can justify certain things. So that was one way. Secondly, I think that when you're a non-technical founder, there's a tendency to focus on the user interface and not the user experience. And I think to many people, if it looks...
Could you make the difference? Could you talk about the difference? I mean, I know...
But specifically, I mean, certain functionalities your platform allows versus how the user goes through it. So, for example, how it feels, how it looks. If you click in a certain place, where does it take you? And the reality is that it needs to feel, it's about how you make people feel sometimes, and not just what you do. If it's going to be a very 1985 looking platform, people's perception about the functionalities will be that it's an outdated one as well. So my suggestion to non-technical founders would be actually invest more in the design and making sure that the flow as a user, just go into the mind of a user and run for it in different platforms to make sure that it feels that it flows very nicely, and it does project a much more mature perception or version of the maturity of your platform. Reflecting on my experience, so our head of product, I met him in a bar, don't worry, in a tech-related networking event. He went to the same. He also went to INSEAD. We have a lot of mutual contacts. It was a bit of a low risk as well. So I think that, reflecting on my experience, one is it is very, very hard to get the right person, to have them committed and actually leave their day-to-day job, which is usually well paid. But also to have someone who's willing to start from scratch and is willing to get their hands dirty. So I've had some, that's the reason I mentioned earlier, that level of values and commitment in that formula is such an important part of getting something done, because you can have a lot of people that are entrepreneurs. They want to think of themselves as someone who's willing to make the jump and work in a startup and build equity and options and whatnot. But the reality is that very few people are willing to do that. So what I did at the end was, one, in terms of how do you assess someone's capabilities, is I asked two very good friends of mine who are technical to interview in detail. They had like a very technical interview to assess that person's capabilities. Definitely always ask for references. Always talk to someone who used to work with them. That's the second best proxy after working with them. Try to spend a lot of time, not just work related. Like, do you see eye to eye about life? Do you get along? Do you enjoy working together? Do you want to be associated by working together? Right? Don't think of, especially with product, which is a very sticky role, right?
What do you mean by sticky?
Sticky as in it's very hard to replace. Unlike a salesperson leaves, you can change the sales function. They just learn the playbook and they carry on. In tech, there's a certain way. People have preference. So if you want to change someone, they'll start the platform from scratch. So you want to make sure you have someone that you think of them long term, right? It's not a temporary hire. I wouldn't go again for a temporary hire. It has to be someone who's passionate about what you're building, whether it's the industry, whether it's about the change or the problem, whether it's about the concept of building a company. They have to be passionate. If they're just okay, they're not they won't have that fire that you need in early stage. So I had people interviewing on my behalf, technical people. I spent a lot of time. We ended up saying, let's work for a month and see how it goes, which was very nice and rewarding, and told us a lot about what soon will be. And then once we raised the money, what it is, I had a clear view on the strategy as what I want, how I want users to do. So what I want them, I want them to experience the platform. And I worked with the head of product to turn it into, from user stories to actual definitions and functionalities in the platform. So I found it's very easy for me to say, hey, here's where I want it to be strategically. Here's the objective, the 3 objectives the platform needs to do. Let's work from there. What the functionalities, and then allowing the head of product to go and build. There's this extra cool feature here. There's this certain way of doing that. There's a limitation preventing us from doing this. Let them compromise on that vision later on and keep on pushing towards the vision. The first thing we did was actually having an outsourced software house, which was fantastic. Also, only from personal references and people referring you to this to providers, technical people who had a really good experience with working them. And it allowed us to scale up and scale down as needed.
Wasn't that awesome? I was especially interested in the investment thesis and in the way that he approached his startup as an investor would approach it. And also I was interested in the non-tech solution that he first created during the pilot to test the project. If you want to see the full session and get the video, then join us as a Tech for Non-Techies member, and the link for membership is also in the show notes. A few of you have written to me asking if you could work with me individually. That is possible, but the spaces are very limited because obviously I run my own businesses. If you're interested in having a one-on-one session with me, have a look at the link in the show notes. On that note, thank you for listening and have a lovely day.